My name is Sean Peterson. I am the Senior Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs for NIADA. What that means is I get to go to work every morning on behalf of you and your dealerships doing two things. One, helping you stay compliant, and two, helping tell your story to members of Congress, federal regulators, work with our state associations in telling your story at the state level, making sure that we get a good set of regulations that aren't too overbearing. So we'll talk about some of the work we're doing here in just a moment.
My name is Adam Crowell. I am President and General Counsel of CompliNet. We are a compliance management team that's been around for over 25 years, actually founded right here in Chicago. We're an Ohio-based company, and we are working very closely with the NIADA to make sure that you have some very common sense compliance solutions that are easy to use and affordable for dealerships of all sizes.
Great, Adam. Sean, let me start by asking, what is a compliance management system, and is it important that operators have one today, and why?
Absolutely. So, and I'm going to have Adam kind of pinch hit on this answer as well, because Adam works in this space, lives and breathes with it, and we've got a great partnership that Steve mentioned in his opening remarks about that. But a compliance management system, that terminology became vogue about 5 or 6 years ago when the CFPB, and by the way, let me point out, if it's okay, Damien, raise your hand. Damien is with the CFPB. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. We're glad that the CFPB is here to interact with us and learn about our industry. And Damien's a great friend and partner at the CFPB. So the CFPB came up with this terminology to help businesses that they regulate understand some of the expectations that they have. And they developed this phrase, compliance management system, to help companies understand when we come in and we start to look at your business, we're going to be looking for a couple of different things. And we want you to put this program into place that involves board supervision or ownership supervision. It involves auditing, it involves complaint management, customer complaint management, training of your employees, all designed to make sure that you've created a culture of compliance in your business. Adam, what do you want to add to that?
That's right, Sean. And creating a culture of compliance is extremely important. It's ultimately what helps you minimize risk. There's 4 tenets, as Sean just explained. You have to have management oversight of your compliance management system. You have to have very clear policies for your employees and learnings, teachings of your employees and corrective actions that ultimately happen. You need to have a consumer complaint management system that is a part of your compliance management system. And as Sean mentioned with the auditing, you need to have an independent auditor that's coming in every so often to make sure that you're actually living up to the expectations that you've set for your dealership and for your employees.
So to Ken's second question, why is this important? It does 2 things. One, most importantly, it establishes this culture of compliance in your business. Without you having a compliance management system in place, and it doesn't have to be something that's extremely robust. What is your compliance management system will be different than Chase Bank, let's say. But what that will do is it'll establish the rules of the road, so to speak. We're ABC dealer. This is what we do. This is why we do it, and that's passed down as you're training and teaching your employees what's expected. But 2, it also helps you build a defendable position. If something goes amiss, to Ingram's point, sometimes things go off the rails and you're not 100% compliant. If a regulator comes in and says, we got this complaint or we're here to investigate XYZ issue, you can point to your compliance management system and say, yes, that may have happened, but let me show you what we do to ensure compliance or do our very best to help train and deal with compliance issues. And that helps minimize any impact that regulator may have as they conduct their investigation.
Great. And, Adam, I'm going to ask this question of you. And by the way, as we're asking these questions, these are some that we had just to start, but we want to encourage your questions. So if you could be thinking of questions, compliance or regulatory questions that are on your mind, we definitely want to take those during this session. So as we go through a few more questions, please feel free. And I think Ingram's in the audience out there somewhere, and he'll circulate and feed the questions up to us. So, Adam, tell us how ComplyNet can help dealers who don't have a compliance management system, or even if they do, how can ComplyNet help them get, have the right system? Tell me a little bit of how ComplyNet will do that.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. So you as dealers have an obligation to treat your customers fairly. You have an obligation to make sure that you're protecting information that's entrusted to you. You have an obligation to make sure that your employees are going home safe every single night. So what the compliance management system does for you, number one, it helps you with that first tenet with a compliance management system of having oversight. You can see things that happen on-site and online within our one portal, okay? So you have different online trainings that you can provide to your employees that are based upon their job role. You have policies that are specific to many federal laws and regulations that commonly impact you. There's a complaint management system that's actually built into the compliance management system. It's called Fair Shake. It gives you the opportunity to actually analyze the different complaints that might be coming in about your dealership and being able to figure out what are the problem areas that I'm having, how do I solve these? And then finally, if we come out on site and we're doing an audit or inspection of either your facility or of your documents, we also get that information included into the compliance management system. So you have that one area where all of your compliance efforts are ultimately being documented. And the great thing about our system too is that we have a lot of flexibility. So if you have certain policies and procedures that you ultimately want to have uploaded into the system and have your employees sign off on electronically, we can do that for you too.
Adam, a question for you. If some of the, I mentioned in my presentation how important it is to have some written policies and procedures, particularly in underwriting and collections. If a dealer doesn't have those right now, can ComplyNet help them develop written policies and procedures? And do you agree that that's important no matter if you're big or small, that you have that?
It's extremely important because ultimately when you have a regulator or you have an attorney that's looking at this stuff, they want to make sure that you actually have put a plan into place and that you're actually trying to follow that plan or procedure. So we do have policies, we have trainings that are ultimately designed for dealers that will ultimately go into that system, but we can also help you design a program. So if you have a program, hey, I have this area that I'm running into an issue with, can you help us design a program or a policy that's around that? We can absolutely do that for you too.
Yeah, and Sean, I'd like you to comment on this. I know some dealers have said to me, well, I'll go to a friendly dealer competitor or someone that we know and get his and then just Xerox them off and use those of my own. Can you talk about the flaws of Xeroxing somebody else's procedures and trying to use them?
Yeah, I guess it depends on how close you are with that friend. There's a significant amount of danger in doing something like that. A lot of off the truck kind of ideas. Those forms aren't current. They don't continually refresh them, update them. Things are always in motion. But ultimately, you need something that fits you and what you do, and your employees. Buying something that is what has been implemented for the guy down the street may work for the guy down the street, but it may be totally different than what you do or what you need. So, quite frankly, the beauty of what we have with ComplyNet gives you the flexibility to establish what will work for you.
Very good. Sean, does NIADA help dealers in other ways developing policies and procedures as well, in addition to your relationship with ComplyNet?
Absolutely. We have all kinds of education available to our dealers through our dealer development team. I'm available to help you with questions. A lot of the stuff that we're working on as kind of best practices and such, we're going to really kind of work through and push through ComplyNet. So stay tuned for more information on that. We're excited about this new relationship.
Sean, I had the pleasure of participating in the policy conference just a couple weeks ago in Washington, and as I told you, and I mean this with total sincerity, you did a magnificent job of putting all that together. Congratulations, and I congratulate NIADA. We really accomplished a lot on Capitol Hill, and a lot of it had to do with how well organized and and all the more than 200 people that participated. If you were there, you really made a difference. But tell me a little bit about the things that we lobbied for on Capitol Hill to share with these operators, because I think they're all important issues, and maybe you can kind of explain the 4 general areas that we talked about.
Absolutely. So I want to extend a personal invitation to everybody that's in the room. Next September, we will be in Washington, D.C. again. We do this every single year. I'm biased when I say this, so you'll have to comb through the bias, but I think most of the folks in the room that are NIADA staff will agree with me that this is the most important thing that we do. Being able to go and advocate on your behalf, but more importantly, you advocating on your behalf. I'm a hack. I'll be the first to admit I'm a hack, but everybody in Washington that I engage with will tell you I'm a hack as well, right? We get paid to go and tell your story, which is important. It's extremely important that NIADA does that. But what's more important is you having the opportunity to come and meet your representatives and senators and tell them your story. I'm going to point out Wayne here in the front row, because Wayne called me on, I think it was last Wednesday, and said, hey, I'm meeting with my congressman tomorrow night. Can you give me some stuff? I'm absolutely, here you go. Timing was impeccable. But you're all invited next September. It costs you nothing. Dealers, 0 to attend. That's how important it is for you to come and be a part of this. So put that on your calendar. We'll get some more information out to you. But what were we talking about this year? Congress is in this very unique situation now where you have a very, what's perceived to be pro-business Senate and a very pro-consumer House of Representatives, where things are colliding, but they're colliding in a way where things could slip through the cracks, so to speak. And what I mean by that, there's not expected to be a lot of legislation that is passed between now and the election next year. But there are a couple of key things that need to happen in order to keep the government funded. So we're afraid that through some of those funding bills and reauthorization of old programs, like, for example, the Highway Trust Fund program, that some of the issues that are important to our industry might get attached as Christmas tree ornaments, we call it, to those bills. One of which is recalls. For years and years and years, we've been on Capitol Hill pushing back against proposed legislation that would prevent you from selling any car with any open recall. Any car with any open recall to anybody. So that means retailing it, wholesaling it. If it's got an open recall under this proposed legislation, you're stuck with it. You're stuck with it until it's fixed. Doesn't make sense for you, certainly doesn't make sense for the consumer looking to trade in their car. They're stuck, right? Because you as the dealer wouldn't take it. You can't do anything with it. So that's issue number one. We continue to push back on that. It's expected that that will see the light of day again sometime next spring. The second issue that we were working on had to do with arbitration agreements. How many of you in the room have an arbitration agreement that you use as part of your paperwork? If you don't, I would consider you take a look at doing that. There's proposed legislation in both chambers, in the House and the Senate. It's actually passed the House of Representatives here very recently. The battleground shifts to the Senate now, that would prevent you from using any arbitration agreement in a consumer transaction, in an employment transaction, civil rights transaction, and antitrust transaction. Probably don't have to worry about the antitrust and civil rights as much, but certainly you're dealing with consumer transactions as you sell your cars and employees. Like I said, that bill's passed the House, very pro-consumer House, battleground in the Senate. We were up there advocating that we need the flexibility to be able to continue to use arbitration agreements. They're faster, they're cheaper. Consumers do better in arbitration than they do in class action lawsuits. I mean, the only people that benefit in class action lawsuits are guys that have ESQ at the end of their names. The next issue that we talked about dealt with tariffs and passing the USMCA, the replacement for NAFTA. The fourth issue is an interesting one for the folks in this room. And Ken, if you've been coming to any of the conferences in the past, Ken's talked a lot about this new accounting standard about current expected credit loss and how you have to realize your expected loss at the point of origination and what that will do to shrink capital accessibility and increase the cost of capital. There are two bills, one in each chamber, that are both bipartisan. Well, the Senate bill's kind of bipartisan. The House bill is bipartisan, so we're hopeful that it will pass. that would put a stop on the implementation of that standard until there's a financial impact study done. We just don't know what it's going to do to the market, so we need to have some understanding of that. So knock on wood, we'll get that bill over the finish line.
Yeah, Sean, the only thing I would add to that is that for most everyone in the industry in the room, that the implementation of this new standard is going to have an adverse financial impact on your business. It's going to increase the allowance for bad debts in your financial statements and reduce your equity. It's going to change your covenants. It's going to change your relationship with your borrower. The point that I want to make, though, is even if it gets deferred, it's going to be coming. There's no question about it. So you need to get ahead of this thing. You need to be proactive. You need to go back and put on your list of things to do to get with your accountant and figure out what impact this new standard will have. If you don't know much about the standard, come see me and I'll be happy to tell you a little bit more about it so you can go back and do it. But get ahead of this thing. Be proactive.
Talk to accountant number 1, talk to your senator number 2, and your congressman.
Good. All right. Very good. Adam, did you want to add anything about Washington and the need to have a strong lobbying effort and a voice and how important that is as well?
Well, I will say about that conference, it's by far the best conference that you'll go to and attend, and you really should go if you have the opportunity to. When Sean is putting this thing together, he's actually having it set up to where you'll go on to Capitol Hill and you're meeting with your representatives, you're meeting with your senators, and you're talking to them. And those representatives and senators, they don't want to hear from people like me or Sean. They want to hear from you. They want to find out what you guys think. Like, give us some examples of something that happens, because they want to hear from you and hear about how these various laws and regulations and proposed laws and regulations are impacting you or potentially impacting you. So it's critically important that you go to these conferences. I personally enjoyed it immensely.
Great, great. This will be for both Sean and Adam. We'll start with you, Sean. If you could give these attendees one tip for how to start on the road to compliance, what would that be? What would you tell them to do first? And then Adam, you've been thinking about it. I'm going to have you do the same thing. How about that? Okay.
So my good friend Terry O'Laughlin, who is Director of Compliance with Reynolds & Reynolds, said something at one of Ken's past shows that just caught my breath. You know, my eyes popped open. I'm like, what did he just say? He said, that which is worth doing is doing wrong. What are you talking about, Terry? No, we want him to do it right. He's like, no, let me explain. That which is worth doing is doing wrong. Start somewhere. Start somewhere. You may mess it up, but if you just have to start. It's like starting the race, right? You're never going to cross the finish line if you don't put one foot in front of the other. So start something, build on it, go to the next thing. And again, the beauty of what we have with Compliant, it lets you do that. If you were to take a tour of the dealership and all the compliance things, I mean, it would be like drinking from a fire hydrant. But if you start with one thing at a time, you'll be able to build your compliance management system brick by brick, step by step.
Very good. Adam?
Yeah, and I would say that the very first thing that you want to do is you want to make that conscious decision that I want to be compliant. And you want to make that conscious decision because you realize you need to do it. It's your obligation. It's your legal obligation. It's your moral obligation. It's ultimately a best business practice. You do not want to be in a position where you're fighting with lawyers or you're fighting with regulators about a lawsuit or a fine. It's something that ultimately could sink your dealership. So you need to make that conscious decision that, hey, I want to make sure that I'm living up to my expectations and that I'm treating everyone fairly, and I want to make sure that I'm really trying to create a culture of compliance at my dealership.
I think those are great advice. The only thing I would add is that the road to compliance starts with appointing someone in your organization to be a compliance management, a compliance officer in your business. And what I'm saying there is, when you leave this conference, you're going to have 100 things that you want to get done, and compliance might not be at the top of the list. So you need to appoint somebody in your organization to start that path, because that's often the best move that you can make in doing the right thing. So I encourage you to do that. Ingram, do we have any questions out there? How about questions from the audience?
Ken, one thing that I didn't hear in y'all's summation was, I've always told people that if you're going to do one thing and only one thing about compliance, take care of the customer complaints.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't do but one thing, complaints at our store are handled 100% different than they were years ago. And it's probably something we should have been doing anyway, right? So handle the customer complaints, take the customer complaints serious, and put them to bed, because a few years ago the CFPB said complaints will be our compass. There are a lot of things I don't understand about the CFPB. There are a lot of things I don't understand about compliance, but I understand what a compass is. And when they say complaints will be our compass, that means they're going to take the complaints against you and come find you, okay? So I understand that much. So bear that in mind. The CFPB said complaints will be our compass. Handle the customer complaints, which is something we should have been doing all along. Justin, you have a question, middle of the room?
Yeah, thank you so much. A question regarding the reserve in case of for write-offs and this new accounting standard, right? If we were to lobby as an organization to allow the increase in bad debt to be tax deductible, wouldn't that be a solution to avoid having to establish a related finance company?
Well, I'll just respond to say that, you know, several years ago, I lobbied the Internal Revenue Service to make that change, which basically allowed you to write off receivables using the cash method of accounting. Basically, if you don't collect it, you get to write it off at that point in time. And that certainly would have made a big difference and would have probably eliminated the need to have a related finance company. Unfortunately, they responded that if they made that change for our industry, they'd have to make it for a number of other industries, and it would have resulted in a significant revenue change. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. I don't see them changing the tax rules for that, unfortunately, even though we'd like to see it. So unhappily or happily, related finance company is the only legal way to do it if you have installment receivables today.
Agree.
Okay, great. Adam, I believe you said that your complaint management system was called Fair Shake. Can you explain that in layman's terms, how that works and how we go about using it?
Absolutely. So what we would do is we would set up a form ultimately that would go onto your website. So if you do have a consumer that has an issue, they're ultimately able to log that complaint. From there, what's happening is it's being routed to the one person that you designated at the dealership to kind of be that default person that can respond. There are certain templates for responses. You can obviously make the response your own. There's abilities to escalate it to other people. So let's say that they indicate on this form that they have an attorney involved. Okay, well, maybe you don't want the person that's handling the consumer complaints, but you might want to get the owner involved, or you might want to get the lawyer involved at that point. But it then gives you the ability to also assign those people and allow them to resolve it. It's tracking it. It's tracking the different types of complaints, whether it's collections, it's a consumer complaint, an advertising issue, some sort of repossession issue. And now you're being able to start to figure out, okay, what are the types of issues that I'm experiencing at my dealership? How can I resolve these? And there's a little bit back and forth that will ultimately happen with the customer trying to get those resolved. And one of the benefits of having this system on your website is it gives them an avenue to complain directly to you, especially if they've talked to someone they feel like they're not getting anywhere. It gives them the ability to go there and make a complaint, because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want them running to the Attorney General's office. You don't want them running to the CFPB. You don't want them running to the Better Business Bureau. You want them going to you first. And with those other systems that are out there, they'll basically tell those consumers, hey, it might be 30 days before you even get a response back. Fair Shake is designed in such a way to get a response to the consumer quickly and before the regulators ultimately get involved.
And they know to go there by going on our website, and then there's a portal or some way they can click on, I want to file a complaint.
Correct.
Is that it? Okay,
Yep.
Great. I think that's important, and I've said in the past, if we'll help manage our business from our complaints, it can be a business management tool also. Let me give you an example. What if you had 5 complaints that customers said, I don't understand when my first payment's due? right? Then wouldn't that tell you that it indicates you got a problem in your F&I department? You need to go redo some policies and procedures in there. So we can use our complaint to operate our business better. I really believe that in the future. It's good. Justin?
We have time for one more, I think, and no? He waved us off.
Waved us off. All right, one front row right here is one more.
Thanks. If you ask the legislation or the legislators, what would they tell you is the rationale behind prohibiting the use of arbitration agreements?
Prohibition of arbitration agreements?
Yeah, so ultimately their argument is consumers should have access to the courts. They feel like arbitration is a private dispute. It's not in the public forum. They feel like companies have more control over, which is, I don't believe this narrative, by the way. Companies have more control over picking the arbiter. Arbiters are going to be more business friendly. The resolutions are kept private. They're not out there for public consumption. It doesn't put pressure on the rest of the industry. All arguments that I think are fatally flawed. And if you look at some of the research that's been conducted by other government agencies, including the CFPB, their own research would suggest that arbitration is in fact better for the customer.
Yep. All right, Sean, y'all want a closing comment from each of you?
Yeah, so I hope you'll take advantage of all of the opportunities this week. We've got lots of great compliance sessions that are available for you, from TCPA to protecting your creditors' rights, et cetera. But I'll be around all week. Feel free to contact me with any questions that you have. I'll be in the dealer's lounge. I'll be bouncing around the conference. Just grab me. I'm happy to chat with you. But I would also encourage you to go and take a look at Complinet's booth and get some more information about this compliance management system. What's your booth number, Adam?
Yeah, thank you. So I want to see all of you at booth 222. That's Complinet. Thank you.
Sean, I'd just like to conclude by saying thank you both for sharing all this with us, and I'd ask all of you to give these guys a big hand.